Prince Harry is back in the palace orbit, not as a ghost from the past, not as a distant family problem politely kept outside the gates, but as a man who may have just walked back into the very center of the royal machine at the exact moment King Charles did the one thing Prince William was never supposed to see coming. He sided with Harry. And if this version of events is even close to the truth, then this is not a reconciliation story at all. This is a betrayal story. A father quietly moving against one son in order to keep the other one close. A king making a choice so loaded, so emotionally brutal, that it may have permanently changed the balance inside the House of Windsor. And the most disturbing part is this. This was never really about welcoming Harry home. It was about using him. If you want to follow this story as it keeps unfolding, you already know where the subscribe button is, so go ahead and hit it now. Let me set the scene, because honestly, the way this whole thing comes into focus is what makes it so chilling. It did not happen in public. It did not happen at some grand balcony moment with cameras flashing and royal smiles being forced into place for the country to see. No, it happened the way the most dangerous royal moves always happen. Quietly. Inside the palace, behind closed doors, in the kind of room where nobody speaks unless they absolutely have to, and where every word said is chosen as if it may one day have to survive history. And that is where William starts to realize something is very, very wrong. Because Harry is there, not officially, not in the way the public would describe it. But there is a presence, a private conversation, a meeting that was never supposed to become known, a back channel that William was not meant to hear about until it was already too late. And when he does find out, the reaction is not dramatic at first. That is what makes it worse. It is not rage. It is not shouting. It is that cold, stunned stillness that only appears when someone with power realizes that the ground underneath them has been quietly moved. Because William understands exactly what Charles has done. He has not just allowed Harry back into the story. He has given Harry a role in it. And once that happens, everything changes. Now, to understand why this matters so much, you have to understand the one thing the palace has always tried to deny. The royal family does not just run on duty. It runs on control. Control of the narrative. Control of access. Control of who gets seen, who gets forgiven, who gets frozen out, and who gets invited back when the institution needs a human shield. And Harry, whether the palace likes it or not, is the most dangerous kind of figure for that kind of system. He is not only the lost son, he is the unpredictable one. The son who left, but never really disappeared. The son who can still ignite attention just by entering a room. The son whose return can instantly make every carefully managed silence start to crack. That is why this is so explosive. Because if Charles has really pulled Harry back toward the center, then it is not because he suddenly forgot the past. It is because he needs Harry for something, and that something may be bigger than family. Now here is the angle nobody wants to say out loud. What if Charles did not bring Harry back because he missed him? What if he brought Harry back because he needed a counterweight? Because William, for all his composure, has become too independent, too rigid, too hard to read. And Charles, the old strategist, may have decided that the only way to keep the future under control is to reintroduce the one person William cannot fully predict, his brother. That would mean the return of Harry is not a reconciliation at all. It is a pressure tactic, a royal chess move. Charles using one son to keep the other one in line. And if that is true, then William is not just being overlooked. He is being outmaneuvered. Let's be honest about what that means inside a family like this. William has spent his entire adult life being the reliable one, the measured one, the future king who does not explode in public, the son who stayed, endured, absorbed, and waited. Harry, by contrast, became the rupture, the one who left, the one who spoke out, the one who broke the spell. And now, somehow, Charles may be deciding that the rupture is more useful than the heir. That is the kind of decision that does not just hurt, it humiliates. Because what does it say to William if the father who raised him, trained him, and prepared him for the crown now appears to be reaching back toward the brother who walked away? It says loyalty was never enough. It says endurance was never enough. It says the son who stayed may still lose if the institution decides the son who left is more strategically valuable. And that is where the betrayal becomes unbearable. Because this is not just emotional, it is structural. If Harry is being brought back into palace life, even informally, even privately, then it means access is shifting. And in the monarchy, access is everything. Access to the king. Access to the rooms where decisions are made. Access to the private conversations. Access to the future. And that is what William cannot forgive so easily. Not the meeting itself, not the optics, but the fact that Charles appears to have done it without him. Because that tells William something deeply toxic. It tells him that his own father may not see him as the sole center of the next chapter. And if that is true, then this is more than family tension. This is succession politics turning emotional. Now here is where the story stops being a theory and starts becoming something far more unsettling. Because William did not learn about Harry's return from Charles. He learned about it from a piece of paper. Not a press release. Not a family message. Not some vague royal rumor moving through the papers. A document. A private circulation note that should never have reached him at all. It was passed through one of the quiet channels the palace uses when it wants to keep things unofficial. The kind of route that leaves no obvious trail, no public record, and no one publicly accountable if the whole thing later blows up. And when William saw it, he immediately understood why it mattered. Because hidden inside that note was a line that changed everything. Harry had been granted temporary private access to a meeting schedule connected to Charles's inner household. Not public engagements, not ceremonial appearances, not anything the press could explain away. Private access. The kind usually reserved for people who are being brought back into the working center, even if only partially. The kind that tells you somebody inside the palace has already decided Harry is no longer to be treated as an outsider. And that was the first problem. The second was worse. William's office had not been informed, not delayed, not accidentally omitted, not still pending. Completely bypassed. No consultation, no briefing, no courtesy call from Charles's team explaining that Harry would be given proximity to the king again. William only found out because the document crossed his desk by mistake. And once he realized that, the whole shape of the story shifted. Because this was no longer just about family tension. This was about a deliberate internal decision being made without the heir, which in royal terms is almost worse than betrayal. It is exclusion. And that is when William started asking questions. Not loudly. Never loudly. Just the kind of questions that make palace staff suddenly become very careful with their answers. Who approved the access? Why was Harry's name in the schedule? Who drafted the note? Which office cleared it? And most importantly, why was this done without him? But the answers did not come. They vanished. One aide said they couldn't comment on internal arrangements. Another said they weren't in a position to discuss private family coordination. A third simply stopped replying altogether. And that silence is what made William suspicious. Because silence in the palace is never just silence. It is usually cover. So he pushed further. And this is where the story gets stranger. Because the document did not just mention Harry. It referenced a closed-door briefing that had taken place 2 nights earlier. A briefing William was not invited to. According to the note, the meeting involved Charles, one senior household official, and an outside legal advisor. No press, no staff, no one from William's office. No record on the public calendar. But there was one line in the document that caught William's attention immediately. It referred to transition sensitivities regarding future family alignment. That phrase may sound harmless to anyone else, but in palace language, it is loaded. It means roles are being redefined, access is being adjusted, and someone is being quietly prepared for a different place in the hierarchy. In plain terms, Harry was not just being allowed back in, he was being repositioned, and William understood exactly what that meant. Because if Harry was being brought into a private strategic conversation before William was, then Charles was no longer simply managing family reconciliation. He was shaping the future around Harry's presence. That was the moment the betrayal stopped feeling emotional and started feeling operational. And there was one more detail. One detail that made everything even darker. The document had not come from Charles's public office. It had come from the king's private secretary's circle, which meant this was not a spontaneous decision made out of sentiment. This had been planned, drafted, circulated, cleared, maybe not announced, but absolutely real. William now knew there was a lane inside the palace where Harry was being quietly reintroduced, and he had been left outside it on purpose. That is what made the whole thing so explosive. Not that Charles wanted peace, but that peace was being built in a way that did not require William's consent. And in a monarchy, that is a very dangerous game. Because once the heir realizes decisions are being made around him instead of with him, every relationship in the room changes. Charles was no longer simply a father. He was a king making side agreements. And Harry was no longer simply the prodigal son. He was becoming part of the architecture again. Meanwhile, William was standing outside the door, looking at the evidence and understanding something he could not unsee. The palace had not just invited Harry back, it had begun quietly making room for him. Now, let's go one step further, because this is where the speculation gets even more unsettling. What if Charles is not just bringing Harry back for reconciliation? What if he is bringing Harry back because he fears what William will do when he finally becomes king? Think about that. Charles knows William better than anyone outside Catherine. He knows his son's discipline. He knows his son's patience. He knows that William does not forget the people who have crossed a line. So if Charles believes that William will eventually cut certain family ties more brutally than the public expects, then bringing Harry closer now might be his way of softening the future. A last-minute emotional firewall. A way to make sure the final transition does not become a scorched earth takeover. But here is the danger in that. Because if you try to protect one son from the other by secretly changing the rules, you do not create peace. You create suspicion. And suspicion is poison in a family built on symbols. It spreads quietly. It sits in the silence between phone calls. It lives in the way people enter a room and stop talking. It shows up in the body language no one can quite explain. And that is exactly the feeling this story leaves behind. Because the palace may be trying to present this as normal family healing. But underneath it, the dynamic has shifted into something much colder. Harry is not simply returning. He is being repositioned. And William knows it. You can almost imagine the moment he understands. Not with a headline, not with a dramatic announcement, but with one small detail. A schedule he was not shown. A meeting he was not told about. A message from the king that arrives too late to be meaningful. A private instruction that makes it clear Harry has been admitted somewhere William thought was still his to control. That is the betrayal. Not public. Private. And private betrayal is always the deepest kind, because it does not just wound the person, it changes how they read the whole world around them. After that, every gesture looks different. Every smile looks strategic. Every invitation looks like a test. Every act of family unity starts to feel like a performance written by people who no longer trust each other. And that is where the monarchy becomes dangerous to itself. Because once the future king feels bypassed by his own father, you are no longer dealing with a family disagreement. You are dealing with a quiet constitutional fracture. A hidden split between the king who is still trying to manage the present and the heir who is already preparing for a future that may not include the same compromises. And Harry, whether he realizes it or not, is standing right in the middle of it. That is what makes him so explosive in this version of the story. He is not just returning to the palace. He is returning as the symbol of Charles's last gamble. The son who might soften William. The son who might absorb the pressure. The son who might help Charles hold the line long enough to keep control. But that kind of move always comes with a cost. And in this case, the cost may be William's trust. Or worse, his silence. Because once William decides he has been betrayed, he will not need to say much. He never does. He only has to wait. And that is the part the palace should fear most. Because if William feels the line has been crossed, he will not scream. He will freeze the room. He will slowly, methodically, and with terrifying patience, make it clear that the future will not look anything like the past. And then everyone who thought Charles was just being kind to Harry will realize the truth. This was never kindness. This was strategy. A king choosing the son who creates movement over the son who demands authority. A father opening the door to the child he once pushed out, because the other child may now be too powerful to control. And that is the most shocking angle of all. Not that Harry came back, but that Charles may have used Harry's return to make a statement to William. A statement that says, very clearly, you are next in line, yes, but you are not the only son who matters anymore. And if that message is real, then it changes everything. Because from that moment on, William is no longer just thinking like an heir. He is thinking like a man who has just learned that his own father may have already begun to divide the kingdom before the crown even changed hands. And that is how dynasties start to crack. Not with noise, with a quiet decision in a private room, with one son brought back in, and another son realizing, too late, that the betrayal had already happened.